Welcome to the 2020 New Testament Challenge. Today we're in Acts chapter 23. Yesterday in Acts chapter 22, Paul was before a scene of rioters. He was rescued by Roman soldiers. He addressed the crowd giving his testimony, but then the commander wanted to find out what was actually going on. So he called a meeting of all the Sanhedrin, and he wanted to hear what the problem was with Paul. Paul was brought before them, and Paul was giving a defense for his ministry. Then a great riot took place almost inside the Sanhedrin. Paul was almost torn to two from the Sadducees and from the Pharisees. The commander, again, rescued Paul, put him into the barracks. Then we read in verse 12 that the next morning the Jews formed a conspiracy and bound themselves with an oath not to eat or drink anything until they had killed Paul. More than 40 men were involved in this plot. They went to the chief priests and the elders and said, "We have made a solemn oath not to eat anything until we have killed Paul." And here was their plan. "Now then, you and the Sanhedrin petition the commander to bring him before you in the pretext of wanting more accurate information about his case. We are ready to kill him before he gets here." They had a plan. It was a wicked plan. But God saved Paul, because his nephew then went to the commander, told him about this plot, and what did the commander do? In verse 23, he then called 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to escort Paul out of the city that night to protect him, all because he was a Roman citizen. Plans are good if they're directed by the Lord. But when we make plans apart from God, God laughs at our plans. But God has a plan as well. God has a plan A to win the world, and that's through his disciples. God wants us to share the good news with those that don't know. He wants them to see Jesus in us. That's plan A. And the thing is, God does not have a plan B. He wants to use the church to impact the world. In the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7, Jesus is telling the disciples, this is how I want you to live. You need to live differently than everyone else. Those that call themselves religious, you need to go to a higher standard, because if you're going to be real, you need to follow what I say. And I'm calling you to live a holy life, different than what you see all around you. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus told the people that they must be different than those who call themselves religious. If you're to be a true follower of Jesus, we must think differently, speak differently, and act differently. In the language of today, we need to be real before people. At the end of the sermon, Jesus even said that not everyone who calls me Lord will be entering into the kingdom of heaven, but only those who do the will of my Father who is in heaven. And what is God's will? God's will is that our words need to match how we live. We cannot say that we love God but hate our brother. We cannot live one way and talk another. If we're really going to be followers of God, then we need to obey all that he has said, and we need to love, and we need to forgive. That's the call upon the church. That's the call upon you and I. If we live out what we believe, the world will see it, and the world will be changed. In other words, what Jesus is telling us is that there cannot be contradictions in our life. We can't say one thing and do another. We need to be real. We need to be transparent. We need to be authentic. When we do, the world will see it. They'll see how we love, and they'll know that God is with us. Thank you for joining the 2020 New Testament Challenge.